And good morning. I'm Dan DeRose with 19 News, coming to you from our digital desk. And we're just taking a look at some of our COVID numbers because it was announced in a press release from Ohio Governor Mike DeWine's office that the governor has in fact tested positive for COVID. In the release, it explained that the governor had mild symptoms, thought it was a cold. As of yesterday, the typical symptoms a cold comes with runny nose, but that his symptoms did worsen overnight. It got to the point this morning where the governor thought he better take a COVID test because he had family plans this weekend. It has been confirmed, and because of his symptoms, he has decided to work from home for the next few days. I do want to show you from the Ohio Department of Health. I'm going to bring up some of their cases, and this is remember, they've changed kind of the way they report cases. It's a little bit less often. We get cases on a weekly basis now, and if you look at our cases, you can see we're averaging about 6,600 cases over the last 3 weeks. But take a look at the 3-week trend. You're seeing from 5,900 cases to 6,600 cases. And then this past week, up over 7,300 cases for the week. When you break that down to a daily average, of course, we're seeing about a little more than 1,000 cases a week. We can look at the same sort of numbers for hospitalizations going the wrong direction, as well as the number of people needing to be checked into the ICU. Let's be honest and forthright, these numbers are nowhere near as bad as when we were at our peak with COVID. That was in January of 2022 when we were seeing 32,000 cases a day. But it does seem to be a little bit earlier this year. We're starting to get into that flu-like repetition where we see it in the fall and the winter, but it does seem to be starting this little fall surge a little bit earlier. Let's welcome in Dr. Amy Edwards with the University Hospitals. Dr. Edwards, we haven't had you on in a while. That's a good thing, I guess, but there is a need to have another conversation with you today. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
It's good to have you back as our COVID expert. Let's talk about what's happening right now in cases. You're an epidemiologist. You also work in pediatrics for university hospitals. You see cases. What's happening right now with COVID?
What we're actually seeing is that we're surging, but we're surging on top of higher numbers from the summer. So when you mentioned the case numbers and things, and it's rising. If you'll remember last year, it did start to rise in late August, September, but we started from zero because last summer we did not have a COVID outbreak. And so you started from lower numbers. It was harder to get to higher numbers faster, right? Because it's a logarithmic change. But what happened this summer is we did have an outbreak, us and everybody else, right? I mean, LA, New York, I mean, it was all over the country. And so when we started to see that late summer surge, we didn't start from zero. We started from a higher number, and it just, now it's, going up, up, up. And we're seeing that in clinics. We are seeing more visits. We're seeing more hospitalizations, as you mentioned. And it's only August, so it's only going to go up from here as people come back from summer vacations, start school. It starts to get cooler, so we move indoors more. Same pattern every winter as with past, but we are going to be starting from a slightly higher number, which is concerning.
Let's talk about what this round of COVID is doing. I personally know 2 people in the past couple of weeks who have gotten COVID, and it's knocked them out. This kind of goes back to in the past year, 2 years, we've seen COVID where, you may have had a cold, you may have sneezed, you didn't feel great, but it was sort of a mild COVID. But I've been hearing from the 2 people I know, this knocked them out. They were in bed 2 days, couldn't move, had no energy. And I know that there are a million Omicron variants out there right now, but what is this round of COVID? The majority of what you're seeing, is this more than a cold? What are some of the symptoms and what's it like?
Well, to be clear, COVID is always more than a cold. Uh, every disease has a spectrum. So influenza, there can be mild cases, moderate cases, severe cases. COVID, there's mild cases, moderate cases, severe cases. It's all to do with proportion and mortalities, like how many does it kill, how many does it make severely ill, and in what proportion. There are viruses like human coronavirus, rhinovirus, human metapneumovirus, whose proportions are very mild. They tend not to put a lot of people in the hospital. They tend not to kill a lot of people. And then there are ones like influenza, COVID, RSV that do tend to put more in the hospital and do tend to cause more death, but all of them can cause a range of diseases. What we're dealing with right now is a certain grouping of Omicron subvariants. They're all very similar to each other that are exhibiting what we call immune escape. That's a term I bet a lot of you wish you weren't as familiar with as you have become familiar with in the last 4 years. And it's different enough from the strains that we were dealing with last year that the vaccine that we were all given for the 2023-2024 outbreak isn't active. So even if you were to go and seek a booster, there's not a lot of cross protection. There's some cross protection, but not a lot. And you can actually increase your number to 3, because I did get COVID for the very first time in 4 years. I've never had COVID before. 2 weeks ago, and I was laid out for 2 or 3 days. It was a bit rough. Primarily the pain. I was impressed by how much pain I was in. But I did finally make a full recovery and I'm fine. But we're seeing a lot of that actually. We're seeing, even in the kids, we're seeing kids who are sick for a day or two with fever, sore throat, muscle aches, laryngitis, even people like losing their voice and that sort of stuff. It does seem to be a bit rough this go around. Obviously, that's what we're seeing clinically. What's going on in a population, we have to wait for the data to come in. But the nice thing is the variants that we're struggling with are the variants of concern that the FDA asked to be put in this year's COVID vaccine. Obviously, we weren't expecting a summer surge leading into an early fall surge. The vaccine won't be available until a little bit later, probably in September or October, hopefully September. But so if these variants continue to be the problem, we are in good stead because we do have a vaccine coming that's active against these variants.
Two things you said there: the immune escape that has my attention, and then impressed by the pain. That sounds like something only a doctor would say, that you went through COVID and you were impressed by the amount of pain. That's not a good thing. Let's talk about immune escape. Maybe in less clinical terms. Here I thought I was protected. Either I had COVID or I'd had the vaccine. And so get into that a little bit more. Why does this seem to be getting around what most of us had built up?
Partially because there are certain types of immunity that are not long lasting. So why do you get a common cold again and again and again? Partly it's because our bodies are unable to have what we call sterilizing immunity against certain viruses. So sometimes we get an infection and we never have that infection again because we're protected for life. So for instance, measles is one of those. Mono, Epstein-Barr virus is one of those, CMV. There are infections that exist that once your immune system has seen them and learned how to fight them, you're immune for life. That's called sterilizing immunity. But viruses exist to make virus babies, right? That's what life is more life. And so there are a lot of viruses and a lot of types of viruses that have evolved mechanisms to hide from our immune systems, to get around our immune systems so that they can keep making virus babies. That's the whole point of why they're in our bodies. And respiratory viruses in particular, influenza, COVID, apparently, rhinovirus, a lot of these viruses that make us sick over and over again, they're so good at what they do that we can't have sterilizing immunity. There's no that doesn't exist. What vaccines do, like the flu vaccine and now the COVID vaccine, is reduce the risk of severe disease. And for a certain percentage of the population, it does work well enough to keep them from getting sick. But for most of us, it simply mitigates what we would be going through. However, with all the different variants, and this is true with flu too, we could talk about this in regards to, an H2N1 outbreak when the vaccine has an H4N3 component or whatever. Different variants can present to the immune system differently because of the proteins on the surface of the viral capsid, the envelope that it sits in. And because of that, it can look different to our immune system, or it can even what we call hide from our immune system because the body doesn't recognize it as a pathogen. So there are different ways to escape our immune system, whether it be by looking different than other versions of the virus or hiding in some parts of our body and inside our cells where the immune system can't get to it, or different things like that. And different variants of COVID have at different times displayed certain types of immune escape. Not all of them have, some of them have. Obviously, having that ability to hide or escape our immune system is part of what makes it a successful virus. Not talking about the human aspect of this, just looking at this from a pure virus evolution standpoint. The virus wants to hide from our immune system, make more babies, and then spread to the next host. That's what it wants to do. And so the ones who are successful in that, who are able to get around our immune systems, are the ones that can cause these outbreaks, despite whatever immunity we might have. And we see that same in other viruses. That's, you can have outbreaks of colds and flus despite immunity because they can learn how to get around our immune system. And that's one thing respiratory viruses are really good at.
Makes sense. Doesn't make any of us happy, but it makes sense that that's the job of a virus. I'm going to give you the final word here. We're speaking with Dr. Amy Edwards, an infectious disease expert with University Hospitals, also a pediatrician area of her work there for UH. You get the final word here. We're nowhere near 32,000 cases a day. That's when we were at our absolute worst. But where are we? And what do you anticipate coming this fall, and what should people know?
So I think the main thing that I really want to kind of wrap this up with is there's a lot of people who have this knee-jerk reaction when they hear COVID to shut down, right? 2020 and 2021 and most of 2022 were traumatizing. Like, let's just be very open with that. Same for me as for all of you guys. And honestly, I do not want to be sitting here talking to you about COVID, but I think we have to accept that COVID is part of our life. It's not going anywhere. I just talked about the fact that sterilizing immunity is not possible. So it's here to stay, one of our viruses. And then there's this other tendency to say, well, if the pandemic's over, COVID's not a big deal anymore, right? COVID still puts people in the ICU. You put the numbers up. COVID still puts people in the hospital, and COVID still kills people every day in this country. It's here to stay. So much like influenza, much like RSV, other severe respiratory viruses that are part of our environment, we have to find a way to deal with this rather than just letting it run loose in our society and harm us as much as it wants to harm us. We need to be cognizant of the times when the virus is increasing, like now, be more vigilant about washing our hands. I love the fact that Governor DeWine tested before making a decision to be with family members. Absolutely the right way to go. That's what me and my family did as soon as we realized we were having symptoms. I knew what was going on. We swabbed, we were COVID positive. We stayed in our house for a week and a half until we were all better and testing negative, because we are young and healthy. We got through COVID. It was a bit rough, but we got through it. But that person in the grocery store that I pass, the person who sits next to me at work or on the bus, I don't know their story, and I don't know how safe they are from COVID as far as underlying medical problems. And so it's all of our responsibility to protect all of us. That is literally what society is all of us working together for all of us, all of our best interest. And so let's be washing our hands. If you have symptoms, let's be putting a mask on. Let's stay home when you're sick. Let's take care of each other.
Some very, very good advice there, and I can't stress enough on your point there, especially when you're feeling sick. Don't send that kid to school. Don't go into your office because you're not protecting society at that point, as you said. You're simply spreading it to others who may be in a compromised position. Dr. Amy Edwards with University Hospitals, as always, we thank you for your expertise and your time today. Appreciate you joining us.
You're very welcome. Always happy to be with you.
All right, take care. Again, if you hadn't heard, Ohio Governor DeWine tested positive today for COVID-19. He's been dealing with symptoms over the last couple of days, and it's gotten to a point to where his symptoms, according to a press release, got worse overnight, but that he's going to stay home and fight this thing. And as you heard from Dr. Edwards, our numbers are high right now because we had a little bit of a summer surge. We never got to zero during the summer. And so when you don't get to zero and now you have a new surge coming here late summer, early fall, your numbers are going to grow a little bit faster than they did last year. If we have any other breaking news, it'll be right here on our digital platforms. Otherwise, our noon news is just 6 minutes away on Channel 19. Until then, I'm Dan DeRose with 19 News. Have a great afternoon.
19 News is everywhere. Download our CTV apps and follow us on social media @Cleveland 19 News.